take a seat. My name is Mary Judd, and I'm one of the co-founders of Evolve Law, and Jules Miller is the other one, and she says hello from New York. We're excited to be here. This is our second event in Seattle, and I first wanted to start out with the housekeeping. So if you want CLE and you haven't signed in on the clipboard over there, please make sure when you leave that you sign in and out. But we need to have that, and we'll send it off so you can all get CLE. And very excited to be here tonight, and I wanted to thank, first of all, Thomson Reuters, there's Steve, and Bernadette, for sponsoring this event, and then also one of our founding members of Evolve Law is Davis Wright Tremaine, and there are many DWT folks here, including Brian on the panel. We wanted to thank you for your support of Evolve Law, and we really enjoyed working with all of you. So tonight we're here to talk about key performance indicators, and it's one of my favorite subjects, and Jay did mention that he's going to sit in the front row and look enthusiastic even if he's not. So we really appreciate that. I'm just going to run through the panelists very quickly. I know their bios were on the site, but we've got some amazing people here who have worked in and around KPIs. So starting at the other end, we have Andreas, and he's a lean continuous improvement consultant and a former lawyer. He now works at Seattle's Children's Hospital. There we go. And it's interesting because a lot of the work that I do, which is on the small law firm side with KPIs, it doesn't really matter whether you're in law or outside law as far as KPIs go, because numbers are numbers, businesses are businesses, and professional services are professional services. So welcome, Andreas. Then we have Bernadette, who's amazing, and so she helps legal departments and professionals use numbers and graphs and pictures to better understand their businesses. And she's also with Thomson Reuters and one of the co-founders of Serengeti. And then we have, very cool, then we have Frances King, who is here from Microsoft. She is a business manager in the procurement and contracting team, and she oversees the firm's legal managed services. Very interesting and new area. And last but not least is Brian, and he's from DWT, and it's very interesting to me. He works on their pricing models, and are you in the finance department or de novo?
Yes, both.
Yes, and so Davis Wright Tremaine has this interesting group called de novo, which Jay Hall runs that. So if you're interested in that, you can come up afterwards and talk with people. So we're going to have a conversation here. We have a mic, and Greg is recording this, and he's recording the panel, and I'm supposed to be off the camera.
Oh, you're on. You look awesome.
That was not our deal. So before we get started, I wanted to know how many people in the audience are either in-house or legal ops?
Where are my people? Raise them up, guys. Right? You're not afraid of numbers.
A little group in the back.
A very powerful group, though, in the back. Small but powerful, for sure.
And then how many people are here from a law firm? And put your hand down if you're from a big law firm. There's some small law. Excellent. So how many of you use key performance indicators or KPIs? Okay, so we have some people to convert with the panel here. And how many people use technology in some way in their practice, and that does not include Microsoft Word? Nothing wrong with Microsoft, but it doesn't count. Okay, great. So we want to talk a little bit about tech adoption and KPIs and measurement. But we had a conversation with the panel before this evening, and we talked about how it really starts with change. And having making a change or having this collaboration between legal departments and law firms is something that I want each person on the panel to comment on. So maybe we can start with whoever has the microphone. So what is stopping people from collaborating more closely?
I think, part of the problem is that it's something that's relatively novel and new. KPIs in general, you think of, oh, well, that belongs in the business world. BI doesn't apply here. So I think the newness of it is something that might prohibit people from, jumping into it and getting into it. It has to be something that everybody is interested in and passionate and, willing to invest in. It's not easy. You got to start somewhere. You got to collaborate and work together, but definitely worth it from my perspective.
So I think one of the challenges that we run into is we're not sure what to measure. And that's a question that we need to talk with our clients about. In a law firm, what we typically measure is rates and hours, and we look at matters, but we don't really get too much into the work and how is the work being done and what's valuable and what's not. So I think that figuring out what's important to our clients and then how we measure that is what we're trying to figure out right now.
A general counsel once told me this story. So he's a young general counsel. He goes into his first executive leadership team meeting. So he's a good general counsel. He goes to his head of litigation and puts down 3 bullet points on the yellow pad of paper that all of us as attorneys are just, born with. He goes to his head of transactions, the same thing, bullet points. And what happens is he goes into this ELT meeting and the head of sales comes up and has a PowerPoint and has numbers, pictures, stories, right? Tells a story about his contributions. The head of sales sits down. The head of R&D gets up, talks about investment and what their team is producing, and that is shared with other C-suite levels in numbers, picture, stories. Same with marketing. Each of his peers goes up, numbers, picture, stories, and he is crumbling inside because he has a stupid yellow pad of paper with bullet points. And what he said was, when you go to law school, you learn, what is our mantra? Issue, rule, analysis, conclusion, right? And we don't learn, the reason why I went to law school is I cannot add, or I don't want to add. There are smarter people that can do that. I don't like the sight of blood. I was relegated to law school. We talked about this earlier. But what we've seen in the last few years, especially after the global financial crisis, was that general counsel and corporate counsel helped with really smart LDO professionals need to adopt a numbers, picture, story to talk about the law firms they are working with and the limited resources, either internal resources or external budget that they are dealing with. And you need external change in forces like a global financial crisis to change lawyers that are deep in precedent and who don't want to talk about process, but now they're being forced to.
Okay, so I think the question is about collaboration. We'll talk about a bunch of other stuff. I feel like I'll come back to collaboration. So KPIs and metrics, why are they so important? For me, they're so important because they actually serve as a mechanism to bring people together. If I have one interest on a project, Bernadette, you have another, and so forth, we all have different interests. It's really hard for us to come around a particular issue and improve it. And so KPIs and just metrics in general help us to really synthesize value, and it helps us to hone in on where it is that we have agreed to deliver value. So for me, I really use KPIs in solving problems and in bringing teams together to align on a particular vision. And then I use those metrics to answer the question, are we getting better or not? And at the end of the day, each one of those questions is about a decision. And so what I always say is, if we're going to measure something, let's make sure that we're making a decision from that measurement. And so I think that's how I come back to collaboration. It brings us together as a decision point.
I'll ask you the same question that I asked you on the phone because, right, like in law school,
Mike.
like Mike. So whether you're in-house or whether you're a lawyer, right, there is no discipline about learning about numbers, or again, to tell. We are great storytellers, but we don't use numbers to do that, right? It's my gut, it's my intuition. So how do you get lawyers in their old stodgy ways to think that way, right? When they're not as you might know, they're not the easiest. How did you start to develop that, and how would you ask others to start to embrace that?
So currently I work with doctors at Children's. Locke and I were talking about this earlier. And doctors are a lot like lawyers. And they don't like you to get in their business. They don't like you to say, you need to cut this way. And I think that there's some truth about where it is that lawyers and doctors add value. It's in a really precise place. I'm not going to necessarily tell you as an attorney, how you should draft X contract, but I might help you wrap your brain around the duration that it takes to complete that process, or the various pieces of information that you need to gather in order to concrete that agreement. And those are all supporting processes and problems to be solved. And I think sometimes when we shine the light, maybe not right at where people's sort of core is, but just around the side and how you can help them be more effective and help them to deliver value, then they can be more receptive to KPIs.
So when I've been doing some consulting with small firms, the way that I've motivated people is by using case studies where if you actually measure it and then take action on it, you can earn more money. And a lot of attorneys, at the end of the day, it's either I want to work this many hours and earn this much, or I want to earn X and I don't care how many, it depends. It's a lifestyle choice. But if you can't measure, then you can't make those decisions. And I think what's really important about what Andrea said is it doesn't matter what profession you're in. It's all about you've got some hours or a service that you're delivering to clients, and your ultimate goal is to provide value to that client. So if the client can't express what value you're adding, you're probably not succeeding. And we're going to have a Darwin talk at the end about how consumers use KPIs to measure lawyers. But how did you come to using KPIs? And we can just sort of go down the, we've got Francis who comes more from the legal operations side, and then Brian from DWT, and then we can continue down. So where's the mic? There's only ever 2 mics.
So, we came to KPIs kind of 2 ways. One was our experience with an LPO, and then the other was basically necessity. So our background is, we were using an LPO. We've been using them for about 6 years or so. And, they've got a process. They collect a ton of data. And what they do with it is they improve, they take in this data and they use it to be more efficient. And we said, that works really, really well. Why can't we apply this to other areas? So we had this situation where we were sending work out to various firms, different grades, kind of no idea what the volumes were. There's got to be a better way. And look, we're doing this successful thing with an LPO, so what can we learn from this? So we said, let's try to apply this to law firms. And then we worked with DWT and Abishaw Goddard in the UK to come up with a managed service program. And if you want to have an outsourced service, if you want to have managed service, you need to have data. You need to have good processes. So it was kind of like you had to do it. We had to figure it out. And, it's tough to figure out which data points to collect. It's pretty new for the area. And, it's I think, pretty expected that firms would be able to have, rates and all that business. But we wanted to go beyond that. So we said, in order to have an efficient process, we have to start looking at numbers. We have to start collecting data and looking at KPIs.
So just for everyone, what does LPO stand for?
Oh yeah, it's a legal process outsourcer.
Okay.
So I use KPIs because we sort of forced into it. We have to make better decisions, right? In the old model of here's my rate and I'm going to work so many hours and multiply it by my rate and that goes on the bill, there's not a whole lot of need for slicing and dicing numbers. But in the environment we're in now, where we're trying to be more creative about approaching client value, we need to also make sure that we're making money, and we need to understand how different practices within the firm generate different levels of revenue and different levels of profitability, and we need to understand how changing our behaviors impacts the value we deliver to our clients. And so, going from a place where data wasn't particularly important to now really focusing on it, that was driven by our need to change our business model and the way we deliver service to our clients.
I guess I've been on the forefront working with corporate legal departments, before the global financial crisis and after. And when I think about what we would talk about with Serengeti, when we first started selling Serengeti, we'd say here are a set of rules and we'll flag all of the violations for 5-cent copy or 10-cent copies where they should really be charging you 5 cents. And that's a piece of data we can share to show you how much you've saved off of your bill. Or if you do discounts with your law firm, we can show you how much you've saved. It was very defensive in that way. What we've seen now, though, with the acceptance of technology and companies that have been collecting a ton of data, not just about their law firms, but about their own work and how they staff things, we see corporate legal departments just really mining these treasure troves. And that's to understand who higher performers are. So what is it? We have this gut reaction, I really like working with Davis Wright Tremaine. But why? Is it a level of service? Is it because of discounts? Is it because of responsiveness? Is it because when I put together a alternative fee arrangement, they actually perform pretty well against that and I have predictability? And so we see legal departments taking this data, this treasure trove, and making better decisions. And it's better decisions about what work can come in-house, right? So maybe it is cheaper. Maybe it's time to bring in that person that focuses entirely on employment law and not to use Littler Mendelson for that work. Or maybe it's time to do, there's work that is perfect for an LPO. Or maybe there's a portfolio of work that I can send out as an RFP, and because I have historical data, I could give comfort to the law firm that's bidding on it to understand kind of what our risk tolerances are, what's driving that number, how many matters we expect, what have been the types of defenses we've used in each of these matters. If I have data, and it goes back to the collaboration piece, we can all make some better decisions. So some of it was just kind of reactionary, but now we see legal departments really using KPIs to make better decisions. And it goes to a point that I think there's a lot of data that you can collect, and especially for corporate legal departments, but to understand how to make it actionable and then to tell a great story about how you acted on it and saved is immense for people that are not just lawyers, but business people trying to help a company manage to a bottom line.
Okay, so I've been a lawyer for 10 years, so I hope that hat back on. But I remember reading about my hours, that's for sure. And then I remember having conversations in my head about how much value I was actually delivering to the clients, and whether or not my time was well spent. So I guess that's maybe the infancy of KPIs for me. Prior to working at Children's, I became a strategy consultant at Starbucks. And at Starbucks, I learned to measure all kinds of really little things, everything from transactions per half hour to how long does it take for a shot of espresso to pull. And I started to sort of appreciate the fact that when I could use these little pieces of data, I could have better conversations with people. That I think was an aha that I had, because as somebody who went to, I had an undergrad in history and Latin American studies. That's useless, as far as data is concerned. And then going to law school, I really had grown adverse to that kind of information. And I really began to see that it was a combination of being able to tell a story that could hook somebody's hearts and minds, coupled with that data. And most of the time, the data didn't turn people, but if I didn't couple it, one with the other, the thing fell flat. And so as I told a good story, it always had to have those hooks of data. And so KPIs provide that baseline to have those conversations with. And I think that's how I kind of came to see KPI in my work at Starbucks.
One of the things, I worked on this project, we did a presentation last year at a conference, and I won't mention the name of the company because it's a competitor of Thomson Reuters, but anyways.
There's a lot of them out there.
But we did a presentation, and I worked with a family lawyer, and she had done some KPI work, and one of the things that they did is they gave away a half an hour in all of these meetings, and so she had given away 20 hours in 1 month. And I looked at her and I said, well, what's your billing rate? And she said $250 an hour. So I said, you do realize that you spent $5,000 of your time? She's like, no, but I don't pay myself $250 an hour. And I was like, well, you got to think of it this way. If you were sitting there talking to these people for 20 hours, then you're not being able to bill. And she's a super smart woman. She has a family law practice. She has 4 kids. She juggles 9 million things. She's a great writer, but she's not a business person. So I think KPIs are really a great way of being able to take some simple metrics and translate them to a bottom line for people. So can you guys share just some specifics about, that was kind of a cost of client acquisition type metric, but can you share some specific metrics that you use and why? You can start at any point.
Sure. So, like most law firms, we're looking at utilization. So how busy are our people? We look at realization. How much are they making compared to their standard rates? We'll look at the growth in our practices versus sort of the growth organically in what we do. And then we look at a lot of profitability, and that's surprisingly sort of a new thing for law firms to figure out how profitable your business is. But I'm doing a lot of work in that area because, again, having data is really important, and having a couple of data points that tell an attorney what is more or less profitable is really key. But being able to tell a story, as we're talking about, is even more important. And I would say what I like to do is come up with rules of thumb to tell people, because a lot of the folks I work with are not people who really like data or appreciate it. And so just coming up with some simple rules to tell them, this is a way that you can solve that problem differently next time, that is more profitable, that seems to work really well for other people's clients, cost the client less money. That's kind of what I try and measure, and the stories I try and tell using the data that we collect. But then we also, I spend a lot of time figuring out what does a particular client need to know, and how do we get that data out of the work that we do for them? Because again, a law firm billing system is not a real great source of data for understanding your client's problems and how effectively you're solving them. And so my team will work with attorneys to say, what is the data for your client that you need to know and that you need to understand, that we can help drive decisions for that particular client, and let's come up with a system to start capturing that.
So with us, we have a legal operations team, and they track the normal, rates and annual spend, that kind of thing, spend per matter. And what we wanted to do was go beyond that. So with our managed service program, we start out with SLA. So what is the time it takes for the first procedural response? How long does it take to get a first draft out? How long does it take to get a final draft out? So these are kind of like the baseline points of data that we collect. And then on top of that, so we're looking at total volumes. As a legal department, we just don't track this kind of thing normally. And so if you were to ask any of our attorneys, hey, how many contracts did you do last year? I don't know, a lot, right? Nobody has any idea. And so we're like, let's try to start building a baseline. How many do we do? Where do they come from? What region of the world do they come from? We had a gut feeling that most of our work was coming from the US. Turns out that it's true. We do have some portion of our work that comes from the rest of the world as well, and now we have data to support that. We're looking at which business groups are sending the work in. So, we want to be able to get to a point where we can start really intelligently forecasting our volumes. We just have a general sense like, at the end of every quarter, we're probably spending a little more. We're probably doing more deals. Now we're going to start building out that baseline to see if that pans out, if we actually do what we think we're doing. So we're collecting that kind of data, and along the way we're also saying, hey, what about escalations? How many of them actually come back to us in-house, and what for? Kind of dig into those areas. So all of this is to make sure that we are being more efficient, because otherwise we just don't know. And so we're trying to use this data to help us run a better business essentially and serve our internal clients better as well.
Yeah, I see data being used, and it's really dependent on who I'm talking to in the legal department. Like, I've worked with corporate counsel who are like, I'd really like to get a promotion. What data do you think I should collect? Is it,
It's not me.
I was like, is that me? Is it number of contracts that I've done, and if I were to take my billing rate at the firm, or some hourly rate based on my current salary, or my salary plus benefits, what that would mean. With general counsel and with LDOs, the story that I'll tell you is I've worked with this general counsel, and in October, November, as for any corporation, they're going through their budgetary process. And for each of the C-suite reporting up to the CEO, each of the C-suite gets one PowerPoint slide to tell the department's story. And these are the things that she includes to demonstrate her value and the department's value. And she's trying to demonstrate that because she's trying to secure the budget that she had from last year. And she's trying to secure headcount, or maybe secure additional headcount, or maybe secure additional technology so that she doesn't have to have headcount. So the KPIs that she collects on that front are number of matters opened and closed during the year, right? That is a proxy for her of efficiency. In the legal department, we don't have hourly rates or realization. So there's a lot of work that gets done to demonstrate, like, what do we collect to tell our story. So she does collect matters, a number of matters. She collects data on performance against budget. And the reason why she does that, and it's a huge dance for her, of course, like anyone who's ever had a budget, I think about my wedding budget. You don't want to be over 100%. You might be. My wedding budget, that's what happened. But like with your legal budget, you don't want to be over 100%, right? That is a bad corporate actor. But you also don't want to be under 100%, right? Like, you don't want to be such an efficient legal department that you only use 82% of your budget. Because if you use 82% of your budget, that CEO and that CFO is going to be like, thank you very much, Andres. We are going to reduce your budget by 22% next year because you're that awesome. That's a terrible outcome. So when I talk to law firms and I say, like, this is why predictability is so important. It's not the legal department trying to slash and get every single penny out of you. It's about budget predictability for that particular general counsel so that he or she can maintain that budget and that level of service to the larger organization. The other two KPIs that the one pager, she calls it the challenge. She includes litigation because her litigation budget is her biggest piece of pie, right? So she's looking at turnaround times, She's looking at the number of firms, then again, the number of matters open and closed. She's also looking at total settlement value and duration of those matters, right? So you can see what all those inputs might do to her budget. And then the final is those pieces of litigation that she has started and what her realization rate has been for those matters. And I think there's some really interesting work that's being done for legal departments that are actually profit centers, right, where they're actually making money for their legal departments, and that's a nice KPI to include if we're able to do that.
Okay, let's see. So I'm a consultant, so I get put on. I work on different problems, and so the KPI metrics are always different. So I guess the first takeaway from that is it depends what I measured. It depends on what problem we're trying to solve, and so getting really crystal clear on the problem that you're trying to solve is actually super important to picking the right one. And because otherwise, you're just, it could be needle in a haystack. I actually spent some time today playing around with Tableau, and you guys use Tableau. It's a visualization data package. And there were so many data points, and I was working with this other individual. I was like, well, this isn't related to the problem I'm trying to solve. Back to that question, what problem am I trying to solve? So once you get really clear on what problem you're trying to solve, I think for me the question then becomes one of kind of two types of KPIs or metrics. One being sort of an outcome metric. What's the outcome at the end of the day? Maybe, I don't know, in the legal setting it might be the total hours for the year. But then there's actually, I think maybe what's more important is performance metrics or kind of smaller, more micro data that actually allow you to say, how am I doing right now? And I think that there's a time and place for both. As you think about what data matters to you, I would challenge that equally as important are those macro pieces of data as are the short, smaller pieces of data that allow you to have actionable decisions in the short time to actually affect your daily work and outcome.
Can I add one thing? I've seen a really new trend, especially for legal departments, which is somewhat interesting, but also equally frightening. And that's, they're starting to collect hours again, right? Or doing short-term projects. And I'm almost like, oh my God, like that's why I went in-house, so I'd never have to build my life in another 6-minute increment. But again, like, there's a comfort zone in collecting data about like what it is that we're doing. And so we see more departments doing that. And then there's also probably something to say about subjective data and objective data. So, on some level, the pools of data that are on Serengeti for a particular corporation, their objective data about how much they spent. And then there's a lot of subjective data that we also try to collect. Like, how did you feel about that legal department, that law firm's performance? On a scale of 1 to 5, were they responsive? On a scale of 1 to 5, did they demonstrate the expertise, or do you think that they trained a first year on this particular topic for, that you got to pay for? So it's also very interesting to see how there's legal departments are starting to collect subjective data about and what high performance might mean about law firms and not just law firms, but the big change is now it's not just law firms competing for their business, but outsources or the departments that we work with in the UK, the Big Four, right? Can I tell a story based on data that work should be going to the Big Four or to an LPO? And that becomes a very powerful data if I can show return on that.
So one of the things that we're going to get into is alternate fee arrangements, and Brian can talk about that. But one of the things that I noticed, because my background is accounting, so I did my hours recording actually by hand back then, timesheets when I worked at an engineering firm, and I never actually practiced as a lawyer. But even if you go beyond the billable hour, you still have to track hours, because you have to figure out what the cost was of delivering the service. So I think there is this misconception of, I I can go in-house and never have to actually record another hour, but if you start looking at things on a project basis, every professional services, or, I worked at a software company and we had a flat fee that we would charge per module. And so I had to have everyone track their hours for it. So sadly, you can't get away from it. But maybe it doesn't have to be 6-minute increments. That's the benefit.
15-minute increments.
Half an hour. So Brian, did you want to talk a little bit about the alternate fee, and then everyone else can chime in?
Sure. I would echo what you just said. I talk to a lot of attorneys who have this dream that they won't have to enter their time anymore because we'll do all our work on a fixed fee. And I say, yeah, that's great. You don't have to send your client a bill that has 100 time entries that they have to wade through to try and figure out what you did for them. But we still need to track our expenses, and the way we do that is we assign a cost per hour of their time and allocate that to their projects. So I think in general, talking about alternative fees, it's something that we're doing more and more because no surprise, it aligns our clients' interests with our interests generally more effectively than the billable hour does. Do you want me to talk specifically about anything around alternative fees?
What kind of arrangements have you seen other than like the obvious flat fees?
Yeah. So I guess I would say in general, what some clients are asking for and what I wish all clients would ask us for to really push us in this direction is clients want us to have some skin in the game when we're working for them and have some of our compensation or all of our compensation based on the outcomes we deliver for them. I love that because I think there's an opportunity for a win-win where maybe we make more money and our clients are more assured that they're going to get the work and the results that they desire. It's tough because sometimes it's not clear how we get to the end result in a project, and sometimes it's not totally clear what the end result should be. But I think that the clients I enjoy working the most with in talking about pricing and crafting pricing are those where we have a very strong relationship built on trust, and we can say, okay, what is the desired outcome? What is that worth to you? And let's come up with a pricing scheme that tries to capture that value in a way that's more efficient than just saying, we're going to bill you 100 hours regardless of whether we get you the result or not.
Okay, so we're going to have one last, everybody's going to go down and just say kind of how, there's all this data that we're collecting and people are analyzing what represents success for you, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Oh, for me, success is that our clients are happy. I mean, it's that simple. We need to make money along the way, but the way I think we need to do that is by making sure that our clients are getting the service they want at a price that makes sense for their business. Measuring that is really hard, and that's why we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how do we measure the things that are important to our clients. But ultimately, that's what drives our business.
For us, success, having a predictable fee structure is definitely important. I think Bernadette earlier talked about this. As a corporate department, we have budget pressures to think about. Every year we're getting told, you got to trim just a little bit here, just a little bit there. And every time we come around to quarterly forecasting, we're being measured by what we had budgeted for before. So when we're off, we're always having to go, that's because we didn't quite know, but we have to think of a good excuse for that, right? So, having that predictability month to month is huge for us. So that's a huge success factor. Another big thing though is we just don't want it to be all about predictable fees. We want to also push the envelope a little bit and learn about our business, learn about what's coming in and through our group, and make sure that we're servicing our clients, our in-house clients, our internal clients well. They want to make sure that their deals get done in a timely fashion and that they're getting quality services, which they are, but the more data that we have to support that and to help us create those efficiencies, help us figure out what is not quite working. So, as an example, we've looked at some of our most negotiated provisions. Like, we found that of all of these types of agreements, you guys have problems with these types of clauses. Oh, well, maybe we need to sit back and look at the template and make some changes, make some tweaks. And that'll help us become more efficient and help our businesses close their deals sooner. So, that kind of thing for us is huge, and we'd like to see more of that in the future.
That is crazy, because the type of data that I talk about is more operational around billing workflows. And I think in the coming years, I can't believe I'm going to plug this book, because it's, do you guys know Richard Susskind, right? It's like 50 years ago, he was like, there'll be no more attorneys. Well, now he just wrote a new book called The Death of the Professions. And it's actually looking about how AI will kind of creep into all of the professions. And as with his last book, I don't think there'll be the death of our particular profession. But I do think that in the practice of the law, we see that going on right now, where corporations are looking at standard templates and saying, this is the clause that we're always getting sued on, right? Just being able to say, we screw up this indemnification piece all of the time. And in our handbook, we say it's okay to screw up on this piece, so we need to change that. And being able to put value behind that number to say that we saved the company X amount. The other really interesting, I was working with we often talk about general counsels in these large little departments like a Microsoft that have teams doing this. And I was talking to this solo GC. He started to collect one piece of data, and that piece of data was turnaround time on his paper versus turnaround time when he had to negotiate on someone else's paper, right? Solo GC. And so he was able to demonstrate, this is not rocket science. It was a lot faster to get deals done on his paper. But then what that translated to in the action is he started to train his sales team, and the sales team knew if they were on his paper, they were able to make their dough and make their number in 6 weeks versus 12 weeks. To a salesperson and a little startup, that means everything. So for me, going back to the question, because I'm so fascinated when the data is not just let's pick better outside counsel and let's hire more attorneys. That's the fact that that's not standard across still boggles my mind, but it's not. So a success for me would be to see more legal departments adopting that. But man, can you imagine a profession where when you look at what you were talking about, if I were to collect this data in this particular way, I would be able to put this agreement in faster. We would know that we would have less liability exposure because we chose these particular clauses. That is the rope, that's like Johnny Five, right? Taking over and drafting our agreements, which would be crazy. Anyway, I'm excited for that type of data. And I think that would be success, that lawyers would be able to think that way and to embrace that, because it's coming. The robots are coming.
Let's see. I guess success for me, I think when I personally have felt the most successful is when I've actually taught somebody something, they've applied it, and then they've learned something from it. And so I guess maybe at the end of that is we've created something of a virtuous cycle of learning, and then what you gave to somebody gave broader meaning and hopefully profitability to the organization. So for me, success is, does this thing carry on? And the way that I use KPIs in that whole thing is that the KPIs are something that, from the first measurement to the second measurement to the third measurement, they can stay consistent. Or they can say to us, hey, you gotta look at this a different way. Pick a different KPI.
Okay, so I put the mics over there, so if people just want to put up their hands and ask questions, we'll take questions for 10 minutes-ish, then we'll get to the Darwin talk. So Adam?
All right. So, do I need a mic?
That's probably a better idea.
So I'm really disappointed. All of you have been talking about driving by looking in the rearview mirror. Where are the KPIs about what is coming down the pike? So when I'm thinking about KPIs for my law firm, I want to know how I'm going to be doing better 1 year from now. what's going to be happening in my pipeline 1 year from now. I mean, I have QuickBooks Online, I've already done alternative fee arrangements, everything is flat fee, I'm using Kanban and Pomodoro techniques for, managing my attorneys, doing sprints, focusing on projects. Yeah, I'm doing all that kind of stuff now, fine. How am I optimizing for better throughput, better management of my firm going forward? Can you talk about how I see the future instead of looking in the rearview mirror all the time?
Well, yeah. So, I think that's a great question. It's certainly something that we struggle with. For me, my initial reaction is focusing on principles and figuring out what are the principles that we think are going to drive our business going forward. And you have to look backwards, I think, to figure out what works and what doesn't. But then, I mean, that informs your strategy going forward. So I can't tell the firm where we're going to be in a year, but I can tell them what our clients are telling us now about what we need to measure and how we need to change our business. And I can tell them a story about how a client that does something different worked with one of our lawyers who does something different and how that changed the practice. I don't know if that's more specific, maybe? Yeah.
CRMs and sales tracking, marketing activities, how does all of that factor into the KPIs that then are dealing with? How does that integrate with the actual workflow?
Okay, well, I mean, I guess what I think of when you describe it that way is we're looking for trends. We're looking for trends in our clients. We're looking for trends in the work that they're asking us to do. And that's where I see the future is I'm seeing, certainly there are pricing differences, so we have to price things differently. But they're also asking us to solve different problems. So it's not new, but we're not being asked to solve just the legal problem that the client has. We're being asked to go beyond that and solve the business problem, right? And to see around the corner and solve the business problem that they don't necessarily know they have by looking at data that we generate, that they generate. So I don't have a specific example of a tool that we use that gets us to, I think, what you're talking about. But what I would say is again, it's all about the story. It's about recognizing where are our clients going and how do we sort of get out ahead of that and meet them there.
But how do you know where they're going?
Well, we ask them, right? I mean, that's a big part of my job is I go to all around the firm and I ask partners, what are you seeing in the market? What's different? What are your clients asking you for right now that you don't think you have a very good solution for?
So is there a tool that the managing partner can look at and say, this is what our clients are saying?
No, there's not a tool. No. I mean, it's very subjective, right? I mean, I can put together a report that says, here's this new industry that we're spending a lot more time in, and here's how the revenue is increasing year over year, and we think that that's going to continue. But it comes back to telling stories is a big part of our business.
So, Andres, did you have something?
Yeah, sure. So maybe this is kind of going more into that sort of lean toolkit that you're talking about, but I think that, and it's less about KPIs. I think when you start to build the type of rigor that you're building in your firm, what you're doing is you're actually creating essentially standard work for how you do things, right? So that's essentially what you're doing. And the more standard work that you create, the quicker you know whether the conditions are in line with where they're supposed to be or not. And so the more robust those processes become, the quicker you will know. You won't have to look maybe at the rear view mirror, but you will look maybe right next to you out of your peripheral vision and know you have a problem. And then you have an opportunity to correct it quicker. But I don't know that a KPI necessarily lends itself to, in the moment, change of direction. I think that's why the scope of the metric is really important. And that idea that there are metrics related to the outcome and there are metrics related to how am I doing right now? Am I going 60 miles an hour right now? Or is my RPM on red?
Or even benchmarks, right? So so I always talk about I can measure myself against me last year or 6 months ago, right? Like that's pretty typical. And then I also, what I see the legal profession doing now, both in legal departments as well as law firms, is there some sort of data that's in the commons, so I can say, like compared to other departments of my size in my industry, I am sized right, or I have the right legal budget, or I'm getting hit with the same pieces. So it might not be, I mean, to your point, it's maybe not always looking backwards, but if you have data and everyone structures their data and consumes it the same way, and you can look at other people that are similarly situated, then you can act and pivot there if you so choose based on that data.
So I just wanted to add that if you're talking about like, you know, in non-legal CRMs, you often have a pipeline. So I don't know, like there's a tool called Lexicata, which is a CRM, which then you're going to put in, you know, how many calls are you going to have, or how many client interviews are you going to have, how many clients actually come out of that. So it's a little bit backwards looking, but that's going to show you, okay, I'm converting, so then what do I have in that pipeline? And you can look at, okay, I've got, you know, 20 on average 25 of these a month happening behind me, and I have, you know, this many, and my estimated value for each of those type of clients, because I know you're an IP attorney, because I know you, you know, that's on average is $5,000 a client. So my pipeline is looking at, I don't know why I picked a number like that. So 25 times 5 times 12, if I have it all laying out there, then some big number is my pipeline. But you do always, because I am an accountant, you have to compare to the past to say, okay, my pipeline is lacking. Now that drives what I need to do next month is I need to go out and find some new clients, or my pipeline's good, but I don't have enough staff to deliver this work. So that is...
Where is that?
Where is that? That should be in the practice management systems, either integrated within by using other systems, or it should be something that is part of a practice management system to have an integrated calendar, CRM, and all of these metrics should be on this wonderful dashboard. That's my vision for what should be happening for a small law. Sorry, I think Greg was first and then the gentleman in the back. Greg, who we should thank for doing the video that will be online.
That's right, thanks. So first of all, shout out for, I think, probably the first ever reference to the 1986 blockbuster Short Circuit in CLA.
You're welcome.
I did not go into
You're
this.
welcome.
Okay, so the Washington Bar has commissioned you to decide on the 3 KPIs that all law firms ought to collect. What are they?
Brian's giving away the mic.
Okay, so I'm going to take it from a different perspective, which is if I'm a legal department.
No,
No?
law firms.
Damn. No qualification. You could say something really.
And it's not just for you.
Yeah, I know. Why is your microphone coming over here? Can you repeat your question?
What are the 3 or we can make it easy, what are the 1 or 2 KPIs that are most important for law firms generally?
I'll tell you one that I think should be one for young attorneys, like fresh from law school. Like, how many hours do you actually spend in front of clients and speaking to real clients, right? Like, not behind the books, not drafting, because those are like, because let's just assume we do a fine job training our young attorneys on the actual technical practice of law. The thing that I think really makes a good attorney a great attorney is their ability to actually interact with humans, to ask the right questions, to speak and interact and engage in a way that builds trust and credibility, that allows them I really, the build trust piece, because I think about like how awkward I must have been like as a first year in front of real people, and right. But I think that's an interesting, like, how much time are we taking these young attorneys and really actually doing the thing, like even just for building a book of business, right? Like, yes, good technical work begets other great technical work, but that will not ensure success, right? It's your ability to communicate to clients and to build that book of business, and that is communication, not technical prowess.
If I were going to pick two, it would be client satisfaction and profitability. Happy clients mean more business, and profitability allows you to figure out the parts of your business to invest in and the parts of your business that you need to change. So I think, at a very simple level, those are the things that I care about.
I would add in that you would want to know cash collected per something, either per hour, per attorney, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how much you bill, it's just about the cash.
Yes.
Bernadette, did you have something?
No, this is a little instinctual, but like, I would also like to measure the number of women that are in the profession and in your firm. And again, like how much client time they actually get and what you're doing. Like for me, that would be very important, something that I think the WSBA should put their time into.
Okay.
For the record, we're 3 women and 2 men, so we're doing okay.
I get a question from the